For this lab, and a number of other ones this semester, well, if you're in 1212, every lab this semester, you're going to end up using Excel a lot. What we're going to go over in this video is the list of things I have here. So we're going to show you first, how do you download Excel if you're a UWG student? We give you access. I'll show you where to find it. How to make and name a new tab in Excel. That's part of your first assignment. You have to do that, so I'll show you how to do that. We're going to look at how writing equations in Excel works, copying equations, setting properties of a cell, and then how to make graphs, label them, and adjust their data sets. So let's start with, new window. So where do I, that's my presentation. There's my new window. Here we go. So let's look at, how do we find it? So it's on the website, but the easiest way to get there is honestly to go to Google. I type in UWG Excel. You could type in lots of other things. This is what I did. The first thing that comes up for me, and it'll at least be close to the top for you, will be Microsoft Office 365. This is what you're looking for. So here it gives you some directions, and so it tells you how to download it using your West Georgia ID. Here's what's important. You need to go through and get the download of the desktop version. There is a way to do it where it will let you run it inside a web browser. That is insufficient for our course because it doesn't let you do some of the stuff with trend lines. Now, if you wish to use Google Sheets instead, and you are very proficient in it, that's okay. For most assignments. The very first assignment, you have to actually turn in your Excel workbooks. You have to do it in Excel. But for other assignments, if you like Google Sheets better and know how to use it well, that's okay. Having said that, all my directions are going to be about how to do these things in Excel. So if you're not already proficient in it, maybe I would suggest using Excel, as it's going to match up with all the directions and stuff that I give you. And for the very first assignment, you do have to use Excel because you're actually turning in your Excel workbook as the assignment. But for everything else, you can use the tool of your choice, but you still have to be able to make everything that I'm asking for you, no matter what tool you're using. So that's step one. So now we know where to get it. And so you have to follow through. And your directions, and yours will look different than me after this page because I'm a faculty member. That's why I can't go through and show you exactly how to download it. But if you follow this link here and follow the directions here, you should be able to get it. Also, in non-pandemic times, because I'm hoping to reuse this video. So if you're watching this in the future, hey, we're not in a pandemic anymore, hopefully, but right now I am. You can also use the library computers because they all have a copy of this on here as well. And honestly, any computer lab on campus that you have access to is going to have a copy of Excel at least. So we've got that. Now let's do something with Excel. So what I have here is an Excel workbook that I've put some random numbers in that don't have any particular meaning, but I want to show you how to do some stuff with it. So step one is sometimes you're going to want to have more than one Excel page open. So this is a workbook, and this is a single sheet. So one thing you can do is if you go to the bottom, I'm moving my cursor there now, there's this little plus button. If you do that, it will make a new blank sheet. This will let you keep multiple sets of data together in a single file. You can then right-click that sheet and click Rename, and then I can name it Sample Data Set 2. And then I can click down here, and I go back to my original set. I'm going to rename that Sample Data Set 1. I did that by right-clicking on it. So now I have my things labeled. This especially helps if once you get larger projects, you may have multiple things to keep track of, and you might forget, wait, these data look really similar. Is this one or two? By having those labels, you know. So for the example lab you're working with, I think there are a total of 6 tabs you've got to have. There's 3 practice assignments and 3 independent assignments. And they need to be labeled so I know which thing I'm looking at. So that's step one. Now, here's some data. The way you can get it is you either, you can copy and paste it in from somewhere, you can type it in, you could be provided it, or you can go through and import it. And so that's under here where you see the data tab up at the top. If you go to from text here, you can then go find a file and you can actually import a text file and you follow through some directions that it's got listed on the screen to help you identify your data. But in this case, for the first lab, we're working with data that's really short, you can type in. The importing is really helpful when you have 800 data points. Also, in most cases, if you're having trouble with the importing, you can open it up in a notepad file and press and get it all there. Let me open up a quick notepad file. Notepad. So, if you have some data in Notepad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Obviously, this would be easy to highlight, but let's say it went on like it does in our spectroscopy lab in 1211. It goes down 800 points, and you don't want to have to highlight, scroll down and down and down the screen. If you go up to Edit, there's a button that says Select All. That'll pick all of it for you. And then you can press Control-C or whatever it is on a Mac. I think it's Command-C. And you can go over here. I don't need to save this anymore. And then I can paste it wherever I want by pressing Control-V or whatever it is in Excel. And that'll paste my data there. So that can also work if you're having trouble with the import function and your data set isn't ginormously large. Eventually, data sets get unmanageable to do that way, and then that's why you have import functions to help with things, or maybe you've got some formatting you want to keep. So that's how we get our data in. Now we want to do something with this data. So let's say, for example, for whatever reason, I want to take column A and multiply it by column B, and I want to put this in column D. So what I start with is I put an equal sign. So you'll notice it added it up in this little bar up here. Let me zoom in a little. See if I can zoom. Nah, don't do that. There we go. Make it a little bigger. Okay, that's really big. But that's okay. So we put an equal sign. That equal sign says, don't use this as an equation. If you don't put the equal sign, it's just going to put whatever you type. Like if I put, I want to do A2, and we'll talk about how this works, times B2, and I just press enter, it doesn't do anything. Because it doesn't know it's an equation. It thinks, oh, you want to put A2 star B2 in this tab. Okay. Once I put an equal sign, now it goes, oh wait, this is an equation. So what we do is you'll notice I have this A2 and this B2. So what I'm doing is I'm telling it what cells to go to. And it even highlights them for me. And it'll do this as you type, and it'll color code them. So now it doesn't have anything, so I put A2, bam, makes it blue. Times, and I use the star symbol above your 8 key on your keyboard, times B2. I press enter, that copies it. So now I have an equation that does that. I could have also done instead A2 plus B2. Then it would add them together instead. A lot of times when you're doing this, you want to do this more than once. Let's say I want to do this for all 7 rows. Now, admittedly, you could type A3 plus B3, A4 plus B4. You could go through and do that, but that takes a lot longer. So if you go down here, notice how my cursor changes when I get to the bottom right corner. There's that little dark dot there. It changes. And when I get there, if I click on it and hold and drag it with the left mouse button, I copy the equation for myself. So what it did was it went down, and if you look at the top, it changed the equation by 1. Every time I went down, it added 1 increment to what I was doing. So that's how I make an equation like that, and how I copy it to do it with things. Now, some numbers like this already look pretty reasonable, and that's fine. But let's say I have another set of data. Now I have values like 123,456.24, 238,740. Okay, I'm not going to say this out loud. It doesn't matter what numbers I put in. But let's say they're really big numbers, and I don't actually want them to be quite this big. And in science, you'll get really big ones, right? We will have ones that have like 23 digits or something. So what we need to do is we need to change the property of the cell to only show what we want. So for example, let's say we're working with something that has 3 significant figures. So I only want to show 3 sig figs. So for this, I'm going to go to right click, and I'm going to go to Format Cells. But I'm going to highlight all the ones I want to change. So I want to change these 4. And maybe I'm going to do all of them because I expect to have more data later. So go to Format Cells, and you have a lot of options. These are all the different ways you can adjust this. So different ones are relevant to different types of areas. So for example, if you go to Number, this will let you tell it exactly how many decimal places to use. And the main one we're going to use in this class for really big data sets is we're going to use Scientific. This lets it use scientific notation. So I want it to have 3 significant figures, which means I'm going to want 2 numbers after the decimal place, because the first number is my first sig fig. So I'm going to set decimal places to 2. It's already there. And then we can increment this. Like if I wanted to use 4 sig figs instead, I would switch this to 3. I'll go ahead and do that just so you can see it can change. I press OK. It changes all the things I have highlighted. It doesn't change things I don't have highlighted. So sometimes you might end up highlighting everything you're working with and changing all of them, and sometimes you only want 1 column to change. So that's how you do that when we tell you to, oh, you need to change the properties of this column. I do that some in the directions, and it helps for display, especially when you start working with really large numbers. It can become like, okay, I can't read this. So that's why it does that. So now we have how to get numbers in here, how to make equations, and how to copy them. But now we want to do something with them. A lot of times we're going to make graphs in this class. So let's say, for example, I want to graph A versus B. So I'm going to graph everything in column A versus everything in column B. You can also highlight just a small subsection if you don't want to graph all of it. But I want to graph the whole thing. So I went to the top, and you see how my cursor changed into an arrow? This helps when I have hundreds of data points, and I don't want to try to do that over and over again. So this way I just highlight the whole thing. Then I go up to Insert, and then I want to make a graph. In our class, we're mostly going to deal with scatter plots. That's this one here. It may look slightly different on your version of Excel, but it'll be the one with the dots. And we're going to just put some dots in. We are not going to add any extra lines initially. So here's our data, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit because that's blocking a lot of stuff now. So now I have a graph. Now I'll be the first to say I definitely have some students that take this and then turn this thing in and like, I'm done, Dr. Leslie. We've got some dots on here. Sorry about my phone. Ooh, spam risk is calling me. I think I'm okay with not getting that. Okay. So we've got our graph. Now we need to do some more stuff to it. Mainly, we need to add labels. So there are multiple ways to do it. The one I'll show you, if you go up this green cross here and click on it, you can add axes titles. That does this. So I can now label these whatever they happen to be. Like maybe this is a length in centimeters, and maybe down here on the x-axis was a time in seconds. You would grab it from whatever your data is. Obviously, not all data will be time in seconds versus length in centimeters. So now I have a data set that has labels on it. Now, what else can we do to this? So we can add a trend line, is a really common feature, and we can also adjust which data is in our graph. I'll adjust the data first, because that'll mess, the trend line will be weird if we switch the data afterwards. So let's say I realized, oh my gosh, I don't want column A here, I want column C. What we can do, and we've already done a bunch of stuff to the graph, so we don't want to have to redo it. If I right-click this, and I go to Select Data, you're in a window that looks something like this. And if I go over here to Edit, what that lets me do is it lets me pick where the data comes from. So for example, right now, my x-axis data comes from A, but let's say I actually want it to be C. What I can do is I can literally highlight all of it, press backspace, and now it's gone. And while my cursor is still there, I can now select the data I want. So I want C, so I'm going to highlight C. And I'm going to press OK. And now, when I get out of here, now my x-axis is changed from A to C. Now, if that changed the label from time to seconds to something else, you need to relabel that. But that'll let you make those adjustments. This especially helps when, for whatever reason, it may be being weird, Excel may be being weird with you and not doing what you want in your graph. Or, I thought of one more area I want to bring back up. Let's say, oh my gosh, I want the X and Y axis flipped. So to do that, I could remove this from X, and I know I want B to be the X axis. And then I'm going to remove the stuff in the Y, and I know I want C to be the x-axis. And now, it's changed it for me. Now, obviously, we'd have to redo our labels, because now this is going to be our length in centimeters. And this up here, so don't forget to do this part if you do it, is going to be our time in seconds. So that'll let you flip it when your graph, for whatever reason, isn't setting the right X and Y axis you want because of how you've highlighted it. You may also notice there are a bunch of terms in there. So when you go to Select Data, and we do this, there's a whole bunch of stuff written inside of here, this window. You can also do this by hand, by writing out specific code to do that, but right now I don't think that's necessary for this class, but you can also, if you understand how to, write out where you want it to get the stuff for your function, and it'll get it from there as well. Now, depending on the class you're working in, you may want to do some other things with the graph. So for example, sometimes you might want to add a title. So to do that, I would... my chart title's there, it's just blank. Chart title. So I would have to type something in there to... title. There you go. So it has a title. And obviously don't just name it title. In many cases in chemistry, and I'm mentioning this because in a lot of your future classes this may be what you're expected to do, rather than titling your graphs, what you do is you write a small caption underneath them. So you won't be able to do it in Excel by itself. So for your first assignment, you're just turning in this thing. But let me show you how you can then move it into a Word document if you need to. So highlight your graph, and I'm going to press Control-C. And I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to copy it without this title, so I can show you what I mean. So I copy it, and then I go into a blank Word document, or maybe it's a lab you're already working on. You want to put a graph in a specific place, like I have some writing here. Graph goes below here. Graph goes above this. So I go to where I want it. I press my paste key, which is Control-V on my Microsoft machine. It takes it a second, little whirly ging, and it made a graph. And depending on your class, what it might be is, oh, I need to label this. This is a figure. It's my first one. And I'm going to say, this is a graph of the length traveled by a snail in seconds. Passed. Now, the way I wrote that, I'll point out, I should flip this X and Y axis. It would make more sense to look at time that the snail travels versus the length it went through. I had to come up with a caption off the top of my head. So this particular graph, I think, if I were grading it, I would say, oh, I think you flipped your X and Y axis. You don't have your dependent and independent variables matched right. But this is how you could do that. You can write a small figure caption. It shouldn't be very long. It should describe what your graph is made of. And depending on your class, some classes will instead want the title made instead. So be able to do both, and that's fine. For your first assignment, you're turning these in as an Excel sheet, so you can just leave it on Excel and follow along with the directions of how to label it. But this is what you would do in especially future lab classes. When you have to write a figure caption, all you do is write a short description down below it. Which is different than what you may have seen in some other areas. It actually just comes from the way in which we do journal articles, where we're going to write figure captions below rather than having a figure title. So that really gets through all the things I was hoping to show you with Excel, including how to put it into a Word document, which you can then save and be able to submit. So, yeah. I hope this goes well. Feel free to ask me if you have other questions. I'm sure there's other things that you may need to do with Excel you might not know, and I'm happy to help out with that because I know it can get in the way of the chemistry part, so I want to help as much as I can. But I guess one last thing. I know I said I was going. If you have a problem, step 1 is to go to Google. Or I shouldn't advertise for Google, which maybe you want to use DuckDuckGo, whatever it is. So I'm going to go to Google, whatever it is document you use, and type in Excel. Go with your version. I have Office 2003. No, I don't remember. I think I have 2007, actually. Whatever version of Excel you have. And you probably have Excel, if you got it from West Georgia, Office 365. And then I'm going to type in how to make multiple trend lines. Because maybe I'm having trouble getting more than one on there. And then a lot of times you'll get some tooltips that you can read through, like some pages. Or you can also go and look at videos, and a lot of times you've got people that'll be like, here's a way exactly how to do this. Admittedly, it'll be like a 3-minute video, and you only need 15 seconds of it, but it's the fastest way to see exactly how it's done. So that's a good starting point. And then ask me if you can't figure out, well, I looked this up, and their stuff doesn't look like mine. Or, Dr. Leslie, I don't even know what this is called, so I don't know how to look it up. And that's okay. Feel free to ask me. But this is faster, obviously, right? You have to wait for an email. You have to wait for me to respond. So step 1, do this. If you can't figure it out, well, first fiddle with it a bit, then try to look it up, then ask me, or ask a friend. Friends are nearby and they might be faster. So with that, I will see you soon.